Alright, everyone, welcome to today's episode of Freedom TV. Alright, today's episode is of Straight Facts. Okay, so today's episode we're going to really look into what is libertarianism. So what is libertarianism? It's a pretty valid question if you ask me. So libertarianism is basically the idea of liberty. That we should have an ideology that prioritizes the fullest extent to the maximization of liberty. Okay? That's all it means. Yeah. It's a pretty simple concept, right? Well, let's go a little bit deeper into it. So, libertarianism can probably be divided into around 4 groups. And we're going to go a little bit deeper into it. First, I want to talk about these 4 groups. So, first group is what I would call small L libertarians. These are people like, John Stossel, maybe Rand Paul. It's kind of pushing it, though. So these are people who they're not really into like the deeper philosophy. And if by the way, if I was a group, if I had to fall into one of these groups, I would probably fall into the small L libertarian category. I don't consider myself a libertarian, but if I had to pick one of these, I would probably pick that one. Just saying. But that's small L libertarianism. Basically, it's the idea that they're not too big into the philosophy, but their really priority is, maximizing liberty. But they're really focused on, particular issues, right? They do it by an issue basis, which makes sense, right? So, they want a government, which, again, they believe government exists, and they believe it has certain purposes, which, of course, most of these trends, except one, which we'll talk about a little bit later, they all believe that. But small L libertarianism, particularly, they're willing to be reasonable with you. Maybe the the Atlas Institute, the Atlas Society, I should say, they could fit into this category, hypothetically, solely because they're very practical. They're very much willing to, work with people across the aisle, which I think is really good. And they're really prioritizing themselves a lot of the time on the things that government should do, like borders, for example. It should do them very efficiently. The second group I noticed is what I'm going to call progressive libertarians or woke-tarians. I want to say that this is not left libertarians. The idea of a left libertarian, or what they call them, libertarian socialists, is the dumbest thing I think I've ever heard in my life. That is a inherent contradiction, because socialism, and by extent leftism, which is a broader term to represent left illiberalism from a progressive viewpoint, it is incompatible with liberty as a philosophy. But progressive, these are people like Chase Oliver, for example. I think he probably fits this category really well. They are typically supportive of liberty. However, they do 2 things. First of all, they extremely put a lot of emphasis on liberty, for progressive causes. A lot of time they don't support borders either, so there's that. And they also are a lot more, like, knee-jerk defensive to a lot of things libertarians are not normally defensive. A lot of these people are like, we need to trans the kids or whatever, which is ridiculous. But those are, I guess you can call them progressive libertarians. Next, I'm going to call these people, these are like your minarchists, but I'm going to call, they're kind of like conservative libertarians, but conservative libertarians, that's more something you see like in the broader American conservative liberal, American classical liberal tradition. But these guys, they're not as like defensive of those woke-tarian ideas. They're much more either silent on social issues or personally conservative on social issues. They're also typically, a lot of the time you'll see, these are the people who are really against foreign policy. Not foreign policy. A lot of the time they're very, I guess, isolationist would be a good term. So these people like Thomas Massey, Ron Paul, which, by the way, I disagree with this like segment a lot. But I think Thomas Massey has gone completely off the rails, and I think it's really sad because he used to be he was great, except recently he's kind of gone crazy, and I think it's really sad. But anyway, Ron Paul, he could probably also fit into this category. Again, a lot of the time, very socially conservative or, silent on a lot of social issues. Or if they're not that, they're like, they don't talk about that, but they're leaning towards isolation. Sometimes this isn't like inherent with them. They are, you'll notice, typically more open to conspiracism. It's not like an inherent thing, you just notice. They're a lot of the time they are a lot more open to ideas about conspiracy theories, or whatnot, you know. That leads us to our final group, within this, with the final like faction of libertarians so that's the ANCAPs, anarcho-capitalists. So anarcho-capitalism, I really don't want to get this wrong because I disagree with anarcho-capitalists fundamentally on government and the state and a lot of human nature and whatnot, but I want to get it right. So anarcho-capitalism is basically the idea that we should not have a government. That's where the anarcho comes in. And we should also have property rights, right? And so you might ask, okay, well, how do we defend that? So they say that we're going to have these independent, like, associations, kind of like HOAs, that end up ruling these areas of individuals, and they have, and they're going to defend your property rights. Now, there's a lot of problems with that ideology, I think. The basic idea of anarcho-capitalism is we're going to get rid of the state, and then we're going to reorganize all of society into a society where you have independent associations of individuals. That's going to defend your property rights. There's also a segment that kind of just thinks everyone's going to be nice, which is kind of silly. But I disagree with that fundamentally. I hope I didn't get it wrong. I really hope I didn't. But that's basically the idea, that you're going to privatize the means of force into smaller down. You're going to get rid of the means of force, concentrate it into the state, and you're going to give it basically down to lower level things, or individuals completely, because some people, they don't even believe in those HOAs things where people kind of work together to like build roads and stuff, which is a kind of weird ideology. I hope I didn't get it wrong. If I did, please correct me. Again, I probably have the least of these factions. I have an understanding of anarcho-capitalists. I don't know if I explained it right. I kind of fall short of explaining those anarchist ideologies. But that's, I'm ranting. So moving on, we're going to explain what is the relationship with libertarianism and other parties in America. So, of course, there is a Libertarian Party of the United States, the LP. And it is very much aligned, a lot of the time you'll see it aligned with the Woketarian idea, and as well as aligned with basically all these factions except the small L libertarians. They're not very friendly to the small L libertarians. Even if those small L libertarians are part of the party's typically leaning towards those other factions a lot more. And it's very open to things like conspiracyism and all these conspiracism and all of these other things, which is quite sad. But libertarianism also has a heavy impact on the Republican Party, which makes sense. The Republican Party is the broad center-right party, or I guess right-wing or whatever you want to say. It is the broad party of the American liberal tradition, which gives us libertarianism on one hand, as well as conservatism on the other. So it's not a big surprise, of course, in the Republican Party. I mean, Ron Paul ran for the Republican Party twice, 2008, 2012, as well as, you see Rand Paul is a Republican, Thomas Massey's still a Republican. I think he's probably going to leave soon. I think he's made that clear. And tons of other libertarian or libertarian adjacent people are very, a lot of time they are Republicans. Again, Republican parties, a lot of the time, because of our American tradition towards that kind of thing, very open towards that ideology. That's just my thoughts on the topic. I hope y'all enjoy this video. This was a longer one, probably my longest one of the straight facts. Have an amazing day. Godspeed.